My name is Sienna, 33 years old, and my husband thought abandoning me with a screaming newborn was just a well-deserved vacation. When he came crawling back 2 weeks later, begging me to open the front door, he had no idea the locks were changed. The house was sold and his entire life was completely dismantled. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic partner who completely underestimated your worth. My 3-week-old son Leo cried loudly in our bedroom. I stood in the doorway clutching my abdomen. Sharp pain radiated from my fresh C-section incision. I felt warm blood seeping through my bandages. I was shaking from physical exhaustion and completely terrified. Just feet away, my husband Derek calmly folded designer swim trunks. His expensive suitcase zipping shut sounded louder than Leo. Derek did not even look at his son. He checked his reflection in the mirror, adjusted his sunglasses, and grabbed his luggage. I stepped forward, pleading with him. "Derek, please. You cannot leave right now. My incision is bleeding again. Leo currently has a high fever. I cannot do this alone." He sighed loudly, like I was an annoying child. He turned to me with absolute contempt. "I simply need to relax, Sienna," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I have been working extremely hard as a regional sales director, paying for all of this. You get to stay home all day doing nothing but sitting on the couch. All I hear is a baby screaming and you complaining. I am going to Cabo with the guys for 2 weeks to get my sanity back. Do not ever call me unless someone is dead." He turned his back, walked down the hardwood hallway, and slammed the heavy oak front door behind him. I dragged myself to the window, wincing just in time to see his black Audi speed away. There I was, a successful forensic accountant who dismantled financial fraud for massive corporations, reduced to a weeping mess on my bedroom floor. Growing up in the foster care system, I never had a mother to call. I clawed my way up from nothing, securing scholarships, building a massive blind trust fund before meeting Derek and creating absolute independence. I thought his charm meant he would be a loving father. Instead, he left me bleeding and terrified while he went to drink. I lowered myself to the floor, pulling Leo tightly against my chest. His tiny face was red, his fists clenched. I rocked him gently, humming a lullaby over my quiet sobbing. Every time I shifted my weight, white-hot pain shot through my lower stomach. The doctor ordered strict bed rest to avoid tearing my stitches. Derek knew this. He had sat next to me in the hospital, holding my hand and playing the concerned husband. It was all a performance. The moment we got home and the reality of a crying infant set in his mask slipped completely. We lived in a pristine $1.2 million home. Derek loved bragging to his friends about our house hosting dinner parties to show off the imported Italian marble. What he did not know, what his arrogant mind never bothered to verify, was that the house did not belong to him. I had purchased it entirely through a blind trust I established years before we even met. His name was only on the utility bills. But standing in the nursery, looking at the empty driveway, my financial leverage brought me zero comfort. Money simply could not stop my bleeding. Money could not make my husband love his son. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, my hands trembling. My first instinct was to call for emergency medical help because of the bleeding, but after a deep breath, I realized it was a surface tear caused by the stress of the argument. I managed to clean the wound and apply fresh medical gauze while balancing my squirming newborn. After an agonizing hour of pacing the room, Leo finally fell asleep against my shoulder. I gently laid him down in his wooden crib and stared at his peaceful, sleeping face. A deeply profound and terrifying clarity washed over me. The tears abruptly stopped falling. The suffocating panic in my chest was suddenly replaced by a cold, calculating stillness. Derek thought I was just a weak, dependent woman who would cry and patiently wait for him to return. He completely forgot exactly who he married. I make a living investigating and destroying arrogant liars, and he had just handed me the match to burn his entire life to the ground. Exactly 3 hours had passed since Derek walked out the front door. I had finally managed to calm Leo down and was sitting quietly in the nursery glider chair, taking shallow breaths to manage the sharp pain radiating from my torn surgical stitches. Suddenly, the distinct metallic click of the front door unlocking echoed through the silent house. I froze in place. My heart hammered against my ribs. Derek had barely been gone long enough to reach his departure gate. Before I could process the adrenaline, the loud sound of designer heels clicked rapidly against the hardwood floors. It was not my husband returning with a guilty conscience. It was my mother-in-law, Brenda, and my sister-in-law, Megan. They used the emergency spare key I foolishly gave them months ago. They did not bother to announce themselves. They did not tiptoe down the hall to check if the newborn baby was sleeping. Instead, they marched straight past the open door of the nursery without even casting a single glance inside. I carefully placed Leo back into his wooden crib, gritted my teeth against the searing physical pain in my lower abdomen, and slowly made my way out into the hallway to confront whatever fresh nightmare was unfolding in my home. I found them standing right in the middle of my kitchen. Brenda was aggressively wrapping the thick black power cord of my custom espresso machine around her wrist. Megan was pulling the glass water reservoir off the back of the device. "What exactly are you doing in my house?" I asked, leaning heavily against the doorframe because my legs were trembling. Brenda did not even look up. "Derek called us from the airport lounge," she said casually. "He told us he desperately needed some space from your constant crying. Since you are just going to be sitting around nursing all day, you certainly do not need high-end caffeine. Megan is hosting an important brunch tomorrow, and this machine will look absolutely perfect on her counter." I stared at them, completely stunned by the sheer audacity of their home invasion. "You are breaking into my house to steal my coffee machine simply because your son abandoned his bleeding wife and sick infant to go drink in Mexico?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously level, despite the rage boiling inside me. Megan rolled her eyes and scoffed loudly at me. "Oh, please stop being so incredibly dramatic, Sienna," she sneered. "Derek is the sole financial provider for this entire family. He is under immense pressure keeping a luxury roof over your head. The absolute least you can do is let the man breathe and enjoy a vacation with his friends." Brenda finally turned around to face me directly. Her cold eyes slowly scanned my body, lingering judgmentally on my baggy gray sweatpants and the swollen bulge of my postpartum stomach. "Look at yourself, Sienna," she said with a look of pure disgust. "You have completely let yourself go. No wonder my son needed to escape this miserable environment. Men like Derek have extremely high standards. You grew up bouncing around the foster care system with absolutely nothing to your name, so I know you simply do not understand the immense pressure a truly successful man like him is constantly under. You should be feeling grateful he even bothered to marry someone without a real family to begin with." The inherent cruelty in her voice was not anything new, but the blatant weaponization of my childhood trauma was a new low. My hands instantly curled into tight fists, my fingernails biting painfully deep into my palms. I desperately wanted to scream at them. I wanted to physically throw them out by their expensive hair extensions. But my forensic accountant brain rapidly took over my emotional response. Emotion is the absolute enemy of a flawless strategy. I took a deep breath and intentionally forced my hands to uncurl by my sides. "Take the machine," I said with a chillingly cold tone. "Take it right now and get out of my house. Leave the spare key on the marble island before you walk out that door." Brenda smirked triumphantly, clearly believing she had just won another glorious psychological victory over her weak daughter-in-law. She dropped the silver key onto the counter with a sharp metallic clink. "See?" Megan Brenda said cheerfully, while lifting the heavy espresso machine into her arms. "She can actually be reasonable when she finally remembers her proper place in this family." The two of them confidently walked out, letting the heavy front door slam shut. I stood completely alone in the silent, empty kitchen. They thought they were stripping me of my dignity. They had absolutely no idea they were sealing their own catastrophic fate. The silence in the house was deafening after the heavy front door slammed shut. I stood frozen in the kitchen for a few moments listening to the hum of the refrigerator where my expensive espresso machine used to sit. The physical adrenaline from the confrontation was beginning to fade, leaving behind a sharp throbbing ache in my lower abdomen. I needed to sit down immediately. I needed to breathe. I slowly navigated the hallway, bypassing the nursery where Leo was still sleeping, and pushed open the door to our shared home office. The room was divided into two distinct halves. My side was a pristine L-shaped desk with dual monitors, meticulously organized filing cabinets, and a shredder. Derek occupied the other half. His heavy mahogany desk was always a chaotic disaster zone of scattered papers, half-empty coffee mugs, and unopened mail. He always claimed that his creative sales genius required a messy environment. I slowly lowered myself into his leather executive chair, hoping the soft cushioning would ease the pressure on my surgical wound. I rested my elbows on his desk and buried my face in my hands. A fresh wave of exhausted tears threatened to spill over my eyelashes. I felt so unbelievably stupid. I had ignored all the glaring red flags. I had let his toxic family disrespect me in my own home. I was sitting there drowning in self-pity when my elbow accidentally slipped off the edge of a massive stack of manila folders. The entire pile collapsed, cascading off the edge of the mahogany desk and crashing onto the hardwood floor. I flinched at the sudden noise, holding my breath and praying it did not wake Leo. When silence returned, I leaned over carefully to assess the mess. Hidden beneath the avalanche of corporate sales reports was Derek's old silver iPad. He had upgraded to a newer Pro model 6 months ago and claimed he threw this one away because the battery was defective. Apparently, he had simply buried it under his paperwork and left it permanently plugged into a wall outlet hidden behind the desk. As the heavy folders hit the screen, the device woke up from its sleep mode. A bright white glow illuminated the dark corner of the floor. I reached down, gritting my teeth against the abdominal pain, and picked up the tablet. The screen was locked, but a banner notification was glaring brightly across the center of the display. It was a synced text message from an Apple iMessage account. The name of the sender was saved simply as Madison. Madison was his 22-year-old junior sales assistant. She had just graduated college last year, and Derek constantly complained about how incompetent she was. I stared at the glowing notification banner. The words burned themselves into my retinas. "The suite in Cabo is ready, Daddy. I absolutely cannot wait." The air was violently sucked out of my lungs. My chest tightened so severely, I thought I was having a sudden heart attack. He was not on a desperate mental health retreat with his college friends. He was not overwhelmed by the noble pressures of being a sole financial provider. He was on a romantic, tropical getaway with a woman an entire decade younger than me. And he was using the excuse of my postpartum struggles to justify abandoning his newborn son. A strange physiological reaction happened inside my body at that exact moment. The warm tears that had been pooling in my eyes instantly stopped. The suffocating weight of abandonment evaporated. The terrified, bleeding postpartum wife effectively died right there in that leather executive chair. In her place, the senior corporate forensic accountant woke up. "In my line of work, you do not cry when you uncover a massive discrepancy. You do not scream when you find the hidden offshore accounts. You simply put your head down, follow the paper trail, and build an airtight case that leaves the guilty party absolutely zero room to escape." Derek was no longer my husband. He was now an active investigation. He was a fraud case sitting right in front of me. He had made a critical amateur mistake. Because he thought this old iPad was hidden and forgotten, he had never bothered to log out of his primary Apple ID account. Every single text message, every photo, every email, and every downloaded bank statement was currently syncing to this device via the cloud. I placed the iPad gently onto the center of the desk. I did not know the passcode to unlock the main screen, but I did not need it. I stood up, walked over to my pristine workstation, and booted up my dual monitors. It was finally time for me to aggressively follow the money trail. The dual screens flickered to life, bathing the dark and quiet home office in a sharp, intimidating blue light. I sat down at my workstation, cracking my knuckles out of pure habit. Derek was incredibly predictable. For a man who proudly claimed to be a strategic mastermind in corporate sales, his digital security was absolutely laughable. I connected his silver iPad directly to my secure corporate network server and mirrored the high-resolution display to my left monitor. He used the exact same password for almost everything he owned. It was a painfully simple combination consisting of his birth year, his former college fraternity letters, and a single exclamation point at the end. I easily bypassed the basic lock screen in seconds and immediately opened his synced email application. As a forensic accountant, my eyes are professionally trained to look for tiny anomalies in massive datasets. I quickly ran a keyword search for flight confirmations, hotel bookings, and wire transfers. The receipts for the Cabo trip popped up instantly: first-class international airline tickets for 2 people, a luxury oceanfront suite for 14 days, 5-star dining reservations paid in advance. The total cost was staggering, but what truly caught my attention was the payment method. He did not use his personal credit card or our joint checking account. The digital payment confirmation emails displayed a specific banking routing number that I did not immediately recognize from our usual monthly expenses. I opened a secure browser window on my right monitor and logged into our primary banking portal. I bypassed our standard checking and savings balances, navigating directly to the hidden sub-accounts. My heart suddenly dropped into my stomach. It was the routing number for Leo's college savings fund. Before we even got married, I had set up a high-yield investment account specifically intended for my future children. Because I grew up constantly bouncing around the unstable foster care system without a financial safety net, ensuring my child had a fully funded education was my absolute biggest priority in life. Over the past 5 years, I had diligently deposited every single one of my yearly corporate bonuses into that specific account. Derek had barely contributed a single dime, constantly claiming his monthly sales commission checks were desperately needed to maintain our daily luxury lifestyle. When Leo was finally born just 3 weeks ago, I legally transferred the accumulated money into a formal custodial college fund. But because Derek was the father, his name was automatically listed as a secondary authorized signer by the bank. The current available balance staring back at me on the screen was a sickening 0. My hands flew across the mechanical keyboard as I rapidly pulled up the transaction history. Just 3 days ago, while I was heavily medicated in the hospital recovering from an emergency C-section, Derek had authorized a massive wire transfer. He had completely drained exactly $80,000 from the future of his own newborn son. He had funneled the cash through a temporary holding account to make it look like a routine investment transfer to anyone casually glancing at the statements. But digital money always leaves a permanent footprint. I tracked the routing numbers, cross-referencing them with the receipts in his email inbox. Only $10,000 went toward the lavish Cabo vacation with his young assistant, Madison. That meant $70,000 was still completely unaccounted for. A freezing wave of pure disgust washed over my entire body. He was not just cheating on me with a younger woman. He was actively stealing from our infant son to fund his secret double life. The money I worked 90-hour weeks to save, the massive bonuses I earned while pregnant, nauseous, and exhausted, were all gone in a single click, while I was literally bleeding on a hospital operating table. He genuinely thought my postpartum physical pain and sleep deprivation would keep me distracted long enough for him to permanently hide his tracks. He thought I would just blindly accept whatever flimsy financial excuses he offered when he eventually returned from his fake mental health retreat. I downloaded every single PDF bank statement, every wire transfer confirmation, and every email receipt. I meticulously organized them into a highly encrypted digital folder on my private server. I was no longer acting like a betrayed wife. I was actively building a federal prosecution file against a hostile target. But I still needed to know exactly where that missing $70,000 went. If it was not spent on the vacation, it had to be tied to a major physical asset. I turned my attention back to his synced text messages with Madison, ready to dig even deeper into his pathetic lies. The financial autopsy had only just begun. I turned my attention back to the temporary holding account where Derek parked the remaining $70,000 of our son's stolen college fund. Derek was just a regional salesman, not a brilliant financial architect. His desperate attempts to hide his digital tracks were incredibly clumsy, sloppy, and completely amateurish. I noticed a secondary wire transfer originating from that holding account directed to a newly formed limited liability company. I quickly logged into the State Business Registry database. It took me 3 minutes to pull the official incorporation documents. He had named the shell company Cabo Investments, LLC, registering it just 2 weeks before Leo was born. The sheer arrogance of the name made my blood boil, but I maintained absolute professional focus. I traced the money flowing into Cabo Investments, LLC. The digital trail took a sharp turn. The entire $70,000 was wired out in a single massive transaction just 48 hours ago. I tracked the receiving routing number. It did not belong to a crypto exchange or a high-yield offshore investment account. It belonged to an exclusive luxury auto group located in the wealthiest district of our city. Derek had arrogantly wired the stolen money directly to a high-end luxury car dealership. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I logged into a premium public records database my accounting firm used for corporate asset investigations. I entered the dealership information and the exact date of the transaction. The database instantly returned a match for a recently processed vehicle title and lien. It was for a brand new, fully loaded Porsche Macan. The purchase price perfectly aligned with the missing $70,000, acting as a massive cash down payment with the remaining balance financed through a high-interest dealership loan. I clicked on the digital copy of the vehicle registration document. The name of the primary registered owner was not Derek. It was his young assistant, Madison. He had just bought his 22-year-old assistant a luxury sports utility vehicle using the exact money I had saved to pay for our newborn son's future university education. The emotional betrayal of his physical affair suddenly faded into the background. Cheating was a disgusting moral failure, but what I was actively looking at right now on my screen was a severe premeditated financial crime. He had committed grand theft against his own infant child. He had deliberately forged official bank documents, created a fraudulent corporate shell company, and drained a protected custodial account just to impress a naive girl who was barely out of college. Every single dollar of that down payment represented my late nights at the office, my stressful corporate audits, and my relentless determination to ensure Leo never experienced the financial insecurity I suffered during my childhood in foster care. I sat back in my leather chair staring at the high-resolution image of the Porsche Macan registration on my right monitor. The physical pain in my C-section incision was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, calculated wrath. Derek genuinely believed he was a master manipulator. He thought he could steal from his own family, abandon his bleeding wife, and fly off to Mexico without facing any consequences. He had vastly underestimated the intelligent woman he married. I did not just know how to find hidden money. I knew exactly how to use the legal system to utterly destroy the person who tried to hide it. I carefully exported every single document related to the Porsche transaction. I compiled the state registry files for Cabo Investments, LLC, the bank wire transfer receipts, and the vehicle registration naming Madison as the primary owner. I saved everything into the encrypted digital dossier I was building against him. The evidence was absolutely bulletproof. No high-priced defense lawyer could ever explain away a direct wire transfer from a newborn baby's college fund to a luxury car dealership for a vehicle registered to a young mistress. It was textbook financial abuse, and I was going to make sure the authorities saw every single page of it. I glanced over at the silver iPad. Madison had just sent another synced text message. She had attached a photo of herself holding a glass of expensive champagne in the first-class cabin of their flight, thanking her amazing daddy for the incredible new car waiting for her back home. A chilling smile slowly crept across my face. I reached for my own cell phone resting on the edge of the desk. It was time to let Derek know exactly who was in control of this situation. I unlocked my screen and dialed his personal number. I was fully prepared for the pathetic, insulting lies he was about to confidently tell me when he answered. The phone rang 3 times before the line finally clicked open. Instantly, the deafening sound of heavy bass and electronic club music flooded through the small speaker of my cell phone. I could hear the distinct clinking of expensive cocktail glasses and the loud overlapping chatter of a crowded resort bar. Derek groaned loudly into the microphone, deliberately letting me hear his intense annoyance. What exact part of "do not call me unless someone is dead" did you fail to understand, Sienna? He snapped over the pulsating music. I am currently in the middle of a very important networking conversation with the guys, and you are completely ruining my peace. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream or cry or beg him to come home to his newborn son. I kept my tone absolutely flat, channeling the exact vocal inflection I use when interviewing hostile corporate fraud suspects during a federal audit. You are not networking with the guys, Derek, I said calmly. You are currently sitting in an oceanfront luxury suite in Cabo with your 22-year-old junior sales assistant, Madison. And while you were busy playing sugar daddy on an international beach, I was busy looking into a newly registered shell company called Cabo Investments, LLC. The heavy club music continued thumping in the background, but the line went completely silent on his end for 5 agonizing seconds. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his arrogant head as he desperately tried to calculate exactly how much information I actually possessed. When he finally spoke again, his tone had drastically shifted. He let out a loud, theatrical sigh, followed by a condescending chuckle. Oh my God, Sienna, he laughed, speaking to me like I was a hysterical toddler throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. Listen to yourself right now. You sound entirely insane. The hospital doctors specifically warned me that severe sleep deprivation and hormonal drops could trigger postpartum depression, but I never imagined you would escalate into full-blown postpartum psychosis. You are completely delusional. I ignored his pathetic attempt to diagnose me with a mental illness. Do not try to gaslight me, Derek, I replied coldly. I know exactly what you did. You forged bank authorization documents. You drained $80,000 from the custodial college savings account I built for Leo. You funneled that money through a temporary holding account, wired it to a luxury auto dealership, and used it as a massive cash down payment on a brand new Porsche Macan registered exclusively in Madison's name. He laughed again, this time much louder and more aggressively. You are honestly embarrassing yourself right now, Sienna, he fired back. This is exactly why you just crunch numbers in a cubicle while I actually make the big executive decisions. That $80,000 is not gone. It is temporarily tied up in a highly lucrative exclusive cryptocurrency investment that my fraternity brothers tipped me off about. The returns are going to be astronomical. I simply moved the funds to maximize our family wealth because you are far too financially conservative to take real risks. And the Porsche registered to your assistant, I pressed, refusing to let him control the narrative. Madison is a junior employee helping me manage the complex digital paperwork for the crypto exchange because I am too busy running my actual sales department. He lied effortlessly, not missing a single beat. She needed a reliable company car to travel between our regional offices. It is a standard corporate tax write-off. You are sitting alone in a dark house, bleeding exhausted, and letting your crazy postpartum hormones invent a ridiculous fantasy where I am some kind of cartoon villain. Madison is not even in Mexico with me. I am sitting here with my college friends having a beer. You need to log off the computer, take your prescribed painkillers, and go to sleep before you do something you will seriously regret. His ability to spew complex, interwoven lies without a single stutter was genuinely terrifying. If I were just a regular, exhausted mother who did not understand the intricate mechanics of corporate shell companies and wire fraud, his confident gaslighting might have actually worked. He sounded so incredibly certain, so absolutely convinced of his own manufactured reality that a weaker woman would have apologized for invading his privacy. But I was looking directly at the official state registration documents, proving every single word leaving his mouth was a calculated deception. "You are a liar, Derek," I said evenly. "I have the digital wire transfer receipts. I have the state incorporation files. I have the dealership title. The money was not invested in crypto, it was stolen from your son." The fake amusement instantly vanished from his voice. The background club music seemed to fade away as his breathing grew heavy and sharp against the microphone. His mask of the concerned, patronizing husband completely shattered, revealing the vicious, cornered narcissist hiding underneath. He realized I was not backing down, and his playful manipulation was about to turn into open warfare. The heavy club music in the background suddenly became muffled. I heard the distinct sound of a sliding glass door opening and closing. Derek had stepped out onto the private balcony of his oceanfront suite to ensure his mistress did not hear the venom he was about to spit at me. When he finally spoke again, his voice was low, guttural, and trembling with rage. "Listen to me very carefully, you ungrateful psycho," he hissed into the receiver. "You think you are incredibly smart because you know how to read a bank statement. You think hacking my personal devices gives you ultimate power over me. All it actually proves is that you are a deeply paranoid, invasive, and mentally unstable woman who cannot handle taking care of a baby without having a complete nervous breakdown." I remained entirely silent, letting him dig his own grave with every single word he spoke. My silence only infuriated him further. He wanted me to scream back. He wanted a chaotic emotional reaction to justify his own horrific behavior. Since I refused to give him one, he escalated his attack, finally admitting to everything but twisting the narrative to make himself the victim. "Yes, I bought Madison the car." He snapped, his voice dripping with justified entitlement. "And yes, we are in Mexico together. Do you want to know why? Because she actually respects me. She treats me like a successful man, while you treat me like an annoying roommate. You have been completely frigid and miserable for the last 9 months. I deserve to enjoy the incredible life I built for us. And if you think for 1 second that you are going to ruin my reputation over a simple financial transfer, you are completely out of your mind." He paused to take a harsh breath, clearly pacing back and forth on the balcony. "Now, here is exactly what is going to happen, Sienna. You are going to delete whatever ridiculous screenshots you took. You are going to log out of my accounts, put the iPad exactly where you found it, and shut your mouth. If you make a scene, if you tell my mother, or if you dare contact anyone at my company about this, I will rain absolute hell down on you." His threats were calculated, strikes aimed directly at my deepest fears. "I will hire the most ruthless, expensive shark lawyer in this state," he continued, his voice vibrating with malicious confidence. "I will file for immediate divorce. I will drag you into family court and use your own medical records against you. You are currently on heavy prescription painkillers for your surgery. You have documented anxiety from your childhood in the foster system. I will tell the judge you are suffering from severe postpartum psychosis and are an active danger to our son. I will take full legal and physical custody of Leo before you even know what hit you. You will be lucky if they grant you supervised visitation." A cold chill ran down my spine, not from fear but from the sheer evil of his plan. He was actively threatening to steal my newborn child using the very medical trauma I endured to bring him into the world. And as for the money, Derek sneered, delivering what he believed was his ultimate checkmate. "That house we live in is a marital asset. I do not care what kind of fancy trust fund you put the down payment in. We are married, I live there, and I contribute to the household. I will force a judge to order a partition sale of the entire property. I will liquidate the house, take my absolute legal half of the equity, and leave you completely broke and entirely alone. You will be right back in the gutter where you started before you met me. So you sit there, watch our screaming kid, and wait quietly for me to get back. Do we understand each other?" I stared at the glowing monitors of my workstation, taking a slow, calculated breath. He honestly believed his aggressive corporate sales tactics would work on a forensic accountant holding federal-level evidence. Derek Weiss started to say, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "Do not speak," he interrupted fiercely. "You just listen. 2 weeks, Sienna. Be a good little wife and have dinner ready when I get back." The line went completely dead. He hung up on me. I slowly lowered the cell phone and placed it flat on the desk. He had just threatened to take my son and my home from me forever. He had drawn the ultimate unforgivable battle lines. I reached for my encrypted digital folder. It was time to introduce him to the devastating skills of my brother-in-law. Before my fingers could even touch the keyboard, a sharp chime echoed through the silent hallway. Someone had just pressed the front doorbell. I instinctively froze. My mind immediately raced through the worst possible scenarios. Was it Brenda returning to steal more of my belongings? Was it a police officer Derek had already called for a welfare check? I carefully stood up from the leather executive chair, wincing as a sharp ache pulled at my abdominal stitches. I walked out of the home office and approached the security monitor mounted beside the front entryway. I stared at the high-definition video feed. It was not my toxic mother-in-law or the local authorities. Standing on my front porch looking incredibly stressed was my brother-in-law, Jamal. He was a tall, heavily built IT cybersecurity expert who always looked completely out of place in Derek's shallow family. He was balancing 2 large paper bags from my favorite local Thai restaurant in one hand. In his other arm, he was holding a massive box of infant diapers and 6 large cans of the hypoallergenic baby formula Leo desperately needed. I unlocked the heavy deadbolt and slowly pulled the door open. Jamal let out a heavy sigh of relief when he saw me. "Sienna," he said, his deep voice filled with genuine concern and visible exhaustion. "I am so sorry to show up unannounced. Please let me bring these things inside for you." I stepped aside, allowing him to walk past me into the kitchen. He carefully set the heavy grocery bags down on the marble island right next to the empty space where my stolen espresso machine used to sit. Jamal turned around and looked at me with an expression of profound disgust and embarrassment. "I came home from work early today," he explained, keeping his voice low so he would not wake the baby. "I walked into my kitchen and found your espresso machine sitting directly on my counter. When I confronted Megan about it, she bragged about how she and Brenda used the spare key to come over here. She told me Derek had left for Mexico and that they decided to teach you a lesson in humility." He rubbed his face in frustration, shaking his head. "I was absolutely furious, Sienna. I packed up the machine and put it in the trunk of my car to bring back to you. But then I realized you probably needed hot food and baby supplies much more than coffee right now. What they did to you today, what Derek is doing to you by abandoning his bleeding wife and newborn son, is completely unforgivable. I am deeply sorry that you married into this absolute nightmare of a family." A wave of genuine gratitude washed over me. In a family dominated by narcissistic manipulation and toxic entitlement, Jamal was the only person who possessed a moral compass. He was the only one who saw through Derek's golden boy facade. "Thank you, Jamal," I said softly, leaning against the kitchen counter for support. "You have absolutely no idea how much I needed this right now. Derek just called me from Cabo. He threatened to take full legal custody of Leo and force the sale of this house if I dare expose his affair with his young assistant." Jamal did not look surprised by the mention of the affair or the legal threats. Instead, his jaw clenched tightly, and a serious shadow passed over his eyes. He reached into the inner pocket of his winter coat. He did not pull out his car keys or his cell phone. He kept his hand resting inside his jacket, staring at me with a level of intensity that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The friendly brother-in-law dropping off takeout was replaced by the senior cybersecurity director. "I am glad I brought the food," Sienna, Jamal said, his voice dropping an entire octave into a serious professional tone. "And I am genuinely glad you are already preparing yourself for a major legal battle against him. But dropping off these diapers and apologizing for my horrible wife is not the reason I drove straight over here tonight. I actually came here for something else entirely." He took a slow step closer to me, glancing nervously toward the hallway. as if someone might be listening to our conversation. "I work in high-level corporate network security," he continued softly. "Because my wife is careless with her digital devices, I monitor our entire home network to protect my own professional data. This afternoon, before I even saw the coffee machine, I intercepted an encrypted digital file that Derek had forwarded to Megan for safekeeping. You need to sit down, Sienna. What I found is much worse than him cheating on you." I slowly pulled out one of the heavy wooden bar stools and sat down at the kitchen island. The sharp pain in my abdomen pulsed, but the cold adrenaline rushing through my veins kept me entirely focused. Jamal reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small encrypted black USB drive. He placed it onto the cool marble surface and gently slid it across the counter until it rested right in front of me. I stared at the tiny piece of plastic, knowing that whatever digital secrets it contained were about to fundamentally change the trajectory of my life. "I already know about the stolen college fund, Jamal," I said quietly. I found his old tablet and traced $80,000 to a car dealership for his assistant. He already confessed to it on the phone. Jamal shook his head slowly, his expression grim. "That is just child's play compared to what is on this drive, Sienna. As I told you, I monitor our home network traffic because I work with sensitive corporate security data. Megan has zero understanding of digital privacy. She leaves her laptop open, her email accounts logged in, and she constantly connects to unsecured cloud servers. Yesterday evening, while you were still in the hospital recovering from your surgery, Megan had a few glasses of wine and started bragging to me. She told me that Derek finally had a master plan to secure his financial independence from you. She said Derek was tired of feeling emasculated by your massive salary and your absolute control over the family finances. She actually praised him for being a strategic genius. When she fell asleep, I decided to run a deep diagnostic sweep on her network activity. I intercepted a massive chain of forwarded emails and digital document files that Derek had sent to her for emergency safekeeping. He told Megan that if anything ever happened to his main computer, she needed to hold on to these specific files so you could never find them. Jamal pointed at the black USB drive resting near my hands. "He is trying to steal the equity in your house, Sienna." I frowned, looking up at him in genuine confusion. "He cannot steal the house," I explained confidently. "The property is legally owned by a blind trust I created before we even met. His name is only on the utility bills." Jamal leaned forward, resting his heavy forearms on the marble counter. "I know that," he replied seriously. "But Derek clearly does not know that. Derek genuinely believes his name is on the deed as a marital asset. The files on that drive prove he is currently in the final stages of quietly taking out a massive second mortgage on this property. He applied for a $150,000 home equity line of credit through a shady online lending institution that barely verifies physical documentation. Because he thinks he is a joint owner, he submitted the application under both of your names." The blood completely drained from my face as the horrific reality of his master plan finally snapped into place. To execute a joint home equity loan, he would need my explicit legal authorization. Jamal nodded, watching my eyes widen. "Exactly," Jamal said. "He forged your signature, Sienna. He digitally copied your signature from old tax returns and pasted it onto the final lending agreements. He also submitted doctored financial statements to make it look like you approved the transaction while you were lying in a hospital bed having a C-section. The loan is scheduled to be fully funded and dispersed into his private checking account by the very end of next week." My forensic accountant brain rapidly calculated the massive legal implications of what Jamal was describing. Cheating on your spouse is an absolute moral failing that leads to a messy divorce. Draining a joint bank account is a terrible financial breach of trust. But intentionally forging a signature on a mortgage application across state lines using digital networks is something entirely different and far more dangerous. That is federal wire fraud. He had just crossed the line from a terrible husband into a federal criminal. If convicted, he was looking at serious time in a federal penitentiary. Jamal tapped the USB drive. Every single email, Every forged document and the exact IP addresses he used to submit the fake application are on this drive. I extracted the metadata so his lawyer can never claim his computer was hacked. It proves premeditated intent. I stared at the drive, a fierce sense of righteous justice washing over me. Derek thought his threats would paralyze me with fear. He thought he held all the power. I slowly reached out and picked up the small black plastic drive. "Thank you, Jamal," I whispered fiercely. "You just gave me the exact ammunition I need to permanently lock him in a federal cage." Jamal nodded slowly, fully understanding the gravity of the situation. He did not offer empty platitudes or tell me to try and save my toxic marriage. He simply promised to testify to the digital interception whenever I needed him in court, gave me a brief hug, and quietly left the house. That night, I did not sleep. I sat in the harsh blue glow of my dual monitors, finalizing the digital dossier against the man I once loved. By the time the sun rose, casting a pale light over the quiet neighborhood, I was completely ready to strike. At exactly 8 in the morning, I picked up my cell phone and dialed the direct private office number of Veronica Pierce. She was not just a standard family law attorney. She was a former federal prosecutor who successfully transitioned into high-stakes corporate litigation and ruthless divorce settlements. She was notoriously expensive, fiercely intelligent, and absolutely lethal in a courtroom environment. She was exactly the kind of vicious legal monster I needed to tear Derek apart piece by piece. I hired a private nurse to watch Leo for a few hours and immediately drove straight to her downtown office building. I walked into the sleek, modern glass conference room, placed my heavily encrypted laptop directly onto the polished mahogany table, and handed Veronica the black USB drive Jamal had given me. I did not cry. I did not complain about my deeply broken heart or the horrific emotional betrayal. I laid out the dark financial reality with the cold, calculated precision of a senior forensic accountant. I meticulously showed her the illegally drained college fund, the fraudulent corporate shell company, the luxury car registration documents, and finally the forged digital signature submitted for the massive home equity loan application. Veronica carefully reviewed the extensive documents in absolute silence, her sharp eyes scanning every single detail. When she finally looked up from the files, a highly predatory, dangerous smile slowly crossed her face. "Your husband is an absolute fool, Sienna," she said smoothly, leaning back in her leather chair. "He has essentially handed us a fully loaded weapon. We are not just going to divorce him. We are going to financially annihilate him." He stepped out of his depth the moment he decided to commit federal wire fraud against a professional investigator. Veronica immediately initiated a silent, lethal legal lockdown on my behalf. We moved with terrifying speed and absolute precision. Under her strict legal guidance, I rapidly executed a complete systematic separation of all my personal assets. I legally rerouted my massive corporate salary direct deposits into a brand new, highly secure private checking account established under an entirely different banking institution. I immediately contacted the 3 major national credit bureaus and placed a permanent hard freeze on my Social Security number, instantly blocking the fraudulent home equity loan from ever being fully processed or funded by the online lender. Then we systematically targeted our shared financial resources. I legally withdrew exactly 50% of the remaining available funds from our joint checking and savings accounts. I purposely left Derek with his exact legal half to avoid any early accusations of malicious financial misconduct during the upcoming family court hearings. Next, we permanently canceled every single joint credit card where I was listed as the primary account holder. I watched the digital confirmations pop up on my screen, officially cutting his financial lifeline. The premium platinum rewards cards Derek constantly used to buy expensive steak dinners, book luxury flights, and impress his wealthy fraternity friends were suddenly turned into entirely worthless pieces of plastic. I deliberately did not block his cell phone number or delete his access to my social media accounts just yet. I absolutely needed him to remain completely oblivious, comfortably sitting on a beautiful sunny beach in Mexico, falsely believing his arrogant master plan was flawlessly unfolding without any interruptions. Over the course of a single afternoon, I effectively became an absolute ghost in my own marriage. Every single financial tie that bound us together was silently and violently severed. He genuinely thought he was the ultimate puppet master, completely controlling a weak, bleeding, and exhausted postpartum wife from thousands of miles away. He had absolutely no idea that while he was casually drinking expensive champagne with his young, naive mistress, his entire financial infrastructure had been quietly, legally demolished by the very woman he chose to abandon. The legal trap was now perfectly set and waiting for him to step inside. But I was not entirely finished with my counterattack. Before the weekend officially arrived, I desperately needed to make sure his professional corporate life exploded just as spectacularly as his personal one. The forensic accountant inside me demanded absolute total destruction of his fraudulent career. I returned to the sanctuary of my home office, the blue light from my monitors illuminating the dark room. Derek always boasted about how his corporate sales position gave him unlimited freedom. He claimed he was a master of exploiting corporate loopholes to maximize his personal commissions. What he failed to realize was that those very same corporate loopholes were about to become the precise nails in his professional coffin. When I carefully cross-referenced the bank routing numbers from Leo's stolen college fund with the digital metadata Jamal had extracted, I uncovered a massive fatal error. Derek did not just transfer the $80,000 between personal bank accounts. To avoid triggering a massive fraud alert on our joint banking profile, he had temporarily parked the stolen cash inside a dormant vendor holding account maintained entirely by his own employer. He essentially used his corporate financial infrastructure to wash stolen funds before wiring them to the exclusive luxury car dealership. Furthermore, the digital IP addresses Jamal had intercepted from the forged home equity loan application were not linked to a public coffee shop or a generic cellular network. Derek had submitted the fraudulent federal mortgage documents using his secure corporate virtual private network. By executing personal financial fraud through his company's server, he had legally implicated his employer in a federal wire fraud scheme. He had acted with stunning arrogance and profound stupidity. As a senior corporate investigator, I knew exactly how heavily regulated his industry was. If an external federal agency discovered that a regional director was using company servers to commit felony forgery and launder money, the corporation could face millions in severe compliance fines. The company would have absolutely no choice but to immediately sever all ties with him to protect their own legal liability and public corporate image. I began compiling a comprehensive, devastating forensic whistleblower dossier. I gathered the wire transfer receipts, the fraudulent corporate shell company registration, the forged digital mortgage signatures, and the exact IP address logs Jamal had cleanly extracted. I organized the files into a highly secure encrypted digital portfolio. I deliberately structured the report to look exactly like a preliminary federal audit finding. I strictly used cold clinical terminology. I highlighted the precise violations of corporate financial disclosures, gross internal control failures, and blatant theft. I ensured every single digital file possessed an undeniable chain of custody that no corporate defense attorney could ever possibly dismiss as circumstantial evidence. Next, I utilized an untraceable, heavily encrypted offshore email server to draft the official whistleblower complaint. I did not write it as a scorned, betrayed wife seeking personal revenge. I wrote it as a highly concerned anonymous financial compliance auditor who had accidentally stumbled across severe internal embezzlement and corporate fraud. I addressed the email directly to the Vice President of Human Resources, the Chief Financial Officer, and the entire internal ethics and compliance board at Derek's company. I stated clearly that a regional sales director was actively utilizing secure corporate vendor accounts to launder stolen funds and was operating an undisclosed shell company to purchase undeclared luxury assets. I explicitly noted that the individual had also executed federal wire fraud using company network infrastructure. I attached the encrypted portfolio of undeniable proof. Finally, I added a legally binding closing statement. I warned the corporate board that if an immediate internal investigation was not launched and the individual was not suspended pending a federal inquiry, I would be forced to forward the entire dossier directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I took a sip of cold water, my finger hovering over the mouse. I thought about Leo crying in his crib while Derek packed his expensive suitcase. I thought about the sheer arrogance in his voice when he threatened to take my son away from me. With a single decisive click, I sent the email. The encrypted data vanished into cyberspace, hurtling directly toward the corporate servers of his employer. It was Friday morning. By Monday, while Derek was busy sipping margaritas on a sunny beach in Cabo, with his young assistant, an emergency executive board meeting would be convened. His corporate access badges would be deactivated. His company laptop would be remotely wiped and seized as criminal evidence. His lucrative career, his professional reputation, and his primary source of arrogant pride were officially dead. The guillotine had been released. Now I had to execute the final, most satisfying phase of my entire plan. I needed to ensure that when Derek finally returned from his fake mental health retreat, he would have absolutely nothing left to come home to. But before I could sell the house right out from under him, I had to deal with the inevitable return of his toxic mother. Exactly 7 days had passed since Derek abandoned us. My physical recovery was progressing perfectly. The sharp abdominal pain had subsided, allowing me to move around the house with ease. Leo was sleeping for longer stretches, unaware of the massive legal warfare I was successfully waging in the background. The whistleblower email I sent was a ticking time bomb, and the financial lockdown was holding steady. I was simply waiting for the paperwork on the house sale to clear. But my peaceful Friday morning was violently interrupted by the aggressive ringing of the front doorbell. The chimes echoed loudly, followed by a fist frantically pounding against the thick oak wood. I placed Leo into his bassinet and walked toward the entryway. I did not reach for the doorknob. Instead, I checked the digital security monitor mounted on the wall. Standing on my front porch, glaring impatiently at the camera lens, was my mother-in-law, Brenda. She was dressed in an expensive designer pantsuit, holding her leather handbag tightly against her side. Standing directly behind her were 2 large men wearing matching gray uniform shirts. They were professional furniture movers, and they had a large moving truck parked illegally right in front of my driveway. I unlocked the deadbolt, but intentionally left the heavy brass security chain firmly attached. I opened the door just a few inches, peering out at her through the narrow gap. "What do you want, Brenda?" I asked, keeping my voice flat and devoid of any emotion. She let out a loud, exaggerated sigh, acting as if my simple question was an unbearable inconvenience. "Open this door right now, Sienna," she demanded loudly, waving her manicured hand toward the 2 men standing behind her. "I am hosting an important dinner party for my country club friends tomorrow evening, and my current dining set is simply too small to accommodate everyone. I spoke to Derek on the phone this morning, and he explicitly told me I could come over here and take the large antique mahogany dining table from your formal dining room. Tell the movers to be careful with the hardwood floors when they carry it out." I stared at her through the narrow crack in the door, absolutely stunned by her endless audacity. The mahogany dining table she was referring to was a custom imported piece I purchased with my own corporate bonus 3 years ago. It cost over $12,000, and Derek had nothing to do with buying it. "You are not taking my dining table, Brenda," I replied firmly. "And you are not bringing strangers into my home while my son is sleeping." Her arrogant smile instantly vanished, replaced by a vicious sneer. Her face turned red with sudden anger. "It is not your home, Sienna," she snapped, stepping closer to the door and aggressively grabbing the edge of the wood as if she could force it open herself. "It is my son's home. He pays the mortgage, he makes the rules, and he specifically authorized me to take his furniture. You are just living here on his dime. Now unchain this door before I lose my temper." I did not move an inch. You need to turn around, take your hired movers, and leave my property immediately, I warned her, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I am not going to ask you a second time. Brenda completely lost whatever tiny fraction of self-control she still possessed. She took a step back and began screaming at the top of her lungs, standing on my front porch for the entire neighborhood to hear. You are a psychotic, hoarding lunatic, she yelled, pointing a finger at my face. You are actively stealing my son's property while he is away on a much-needed vacation. You have completely lost your mind since having that baby. I am going to call the police right now. I will have them break this door down, and I will personally press theft charges against you. I will tell the officers you are having a mental breakdown and holding Derek's expensive assets hostage. The two professional movers shifted uncomfortably on the porch, clearly realizing they had just walked into a hostile family dispute. Across the street, my neighbors began opening their front doors to watch the chaotic spectacle Brenda was creating. She pulled her cell phone out of her designer handbag, waving it aggressively in the air. I am dialing 911, Sienna, she screamed dramatically, believing her public threat would finally terrify me into submission. She expected me to panic, apologize, and unchain the door to avoid humiliation. Instead, I simply smiled at her. It was a cold, chilling smile that finally made her hesitate. Please just call them right now, Brenda, I replied softly. Brenda stared at me, her finger hovering over her expensive cell phone. She was genuinely confused by my complete lack of fear. She expected me to beg for forgiveness, but my calm demeanor shattered her aggressive momentum. I stood behind the brass security chain, my expression entirely blank. Go ahead, I urged her again. Tell the emergency dispatcher that you brought a commercial moving truck to my private residence to remove my custom furniture without my consent. Tell them you are trying to force your way inside while my newborn son is sleeping. Let us see how the authorities handle a documented home invasion. Before her manicured finger could press the call button, the mechanical rumble of a heavy engine echoed down the quiet suburban street. A black and white police cruiser slowly turned the corner and drove directly toward my house. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the large windows of the moving truck parked in my driveway. Brenda let out a loud, triumphant laugh, her face instantly lighting up with arrogant satisfaction. It looks like one of your lovely neighbors already called them for me, she said, crossing her arms. You are going away in handcuffs, Sienna. Two uniformed police officers stepped out of the cruiser and walked briskly up the manicured front walkway. The professional movers immediately backed away from the porch, raising their hands defensively. Brenda rushed down the concrete steps to meet the officers halfway, instantly turning on the fake waterworks. She morphed from an aggressive intruder into a deeply concerned grandmother in seconds. Officers, thank goodness you are here, she cried, placing a hand over her heart. My daughter-in-law has completely lost her mind. She is dangerously unstable and refusing to let me collect my son's expensive furniture. The taller officer held up a hand, completely ignoring her dramatic performance. He looked past her, making direct eye contact with me, standing behind the partially opened door. Are you Sienna? He asked in a loud, clear voice. I nodded slowly. Yes, officer, that is me, I replied smoothly. He then turned his attention back to the crying woman standing on my lawn. And are you Brenda? He asked, looking down at a thick manila folder in his left hand. Brenda sniffled and nodded. Yes, I am Derek's mother, she answered confidently, expecting him to arrest me right then. The officer pulled a thick stack of legal documents out of the folder and shoved them directly into Brenda's chest. She instinctively grabbed them, looking down at the heavy black text in absolute shock. Brenda, you are being officially served with an emergency temporary restraining order filed yesterday afternoon in County Family Court, the officer stated coldly. You are hereby legally ordered to remain at least 500 feet away from Sienna, her infant son Leo, and this specific residential property. This order was granted by a judge based on documented evidence of severe harassment and attempted theft of property. Brenda gasped loudly, her jaw dropping open as the reality of the legal documents finally hit her. She looked up at the officers, her eyes wide with frantic panic. "This is a ridiculous mistake," she stuttered, her voice shaking with genuine fear. "I am just trying to pick up a dining table." The second officer placed his hand firmly on his duty belt. "There is no mistake, ma'am," he commanded sternly. "You are currently in direct violation of a court order. If you do not vacate this premises in 60 seconds, you will be arrested for violating a protective order." The movers did not need to be told twice. They immediately dropped their heavy equipment, sprinted back to their massive commercial truck, rapidly started the loud engine, and quickly sped away from the house in sheer panic. Brenda stood completely frozen on the pristine green lawn. She looked around in absolute horror. Every single one of my wealthy, judgmental neighbors was standing on their porches, watching the elegant country club socialite get publicly humiliated by armed police officers. Her flawless reputation in this upscale neighborhood was permanently destroyed. Her face instantly flushed a deep crimson red. She clutched her expensive leather handbag and the restraining order against her chest, practically running toward her parked luxury sedan. Before opening her car door, she turned around and glared at me with pure hatred. "Derek is going to destroy you for this," she screamed, abandoning her fake crying routine. I smiled at her one last time from the safety of my doorway. "I highly doubt that, Brenda," I whispered to myself. I closed the heavy oak door, slid the deadbolt securely into place, and walked back to the nursery. The physical perimeter was secure. It was time to sell the house right out from under them. I walked back down the quiet hallway, ensuring every lock was tightly secured. The physical perimeter was safe. It was time to sell the house right out from under them. I entered my home office, locked the door, and immediately booted up my workstation. I carefully opened a highly encrypted folder labeled Zenith Holdings. This was the name of the blind trust I had meticulously established 3 years before Derek and I even went on our first date. Growing up in the foster care system taught me a brutal lesson about the absolute necessity of financial independence. I knew that no matter who I married, I needed a permanent safety net that could never be compromised by a hostile spouse. When we were engaged, Derek assumed my massive corporate salary was just sitting in a standard savings account. He never bothered to look at the legal paperwork when I purchased this $1.2 million property in cash. He simply assumed that because we moved in together after the wedding, and because he paid the monthly electricity and water bills, the house was a marital asset. He was dead wrong. The property deed was registered entirely to the trust, and I was the sole executive trustee. He had zero legal claim to a single brick of this building. I did not want to list the house on the traditional real estate market. A standard sale would require open houses, lengthy bank appraisals, and weeks of closing procedures. I did not have weeks. Derek was returning from his Cabo vacation in exactly 7 days, and I wanted this property completely erased from his reality before his Uber pulled into the driveway. I needed an aggressive, ruthless buyer who prioritized speed over absolute property condition. I opened a secure browser window and navigated to the website of a massive corporate real estate flipping conglomerate. They were notorious in our city for purchasing properties in pure cash within a matter of days, gutting them down to the wooden studs and rebuilding them into ultra-modern luxury fortresses. I filled out their rapid acquisition intake form, detailing the prime location, the massive square footage, and the premium lot size. Within 20 minutes, my cell phone rang. It was a senior acquisition director for the development firm. I explained that I was the sole trustee of the property and that I was highly motivated to execute an immediate unconditional cash sale. The director was initially skeptical of my extreme urgency. I calmly informed him that I was willing to take a significant financial cut on the current market value of the home in exchange for an expedited 5-day closing period, with absolutely no inspection contingencies. When I named my heavily discounted price, the skepticism instantly vanished from his voice, replaced by aggressive corporate greed. He sent a local field agent to perform a rapid exterior assessment within the hour. By early afternoon, the official purchase agreement was sitting in my secure email inbox. The firm was offering $850,000 in pure cash, effectively stealing the luxury property at a massive discount. I did not care about the lost equity. The sheer speed of the transaction was worth every single penny. I digitally signed the commercial real estate contracts, executing my absolute legal authority as the trustee. I forwarded the finalized documents to Veronica Pierce, my corporate litigation attorney, to ensure the cash would bypass all traditional escrow delays and deposit directly into my newly secured untraceable private checking account. The developers moved with terrifying efficiency. They were eager to begin their massive demolition and renovation project to maximize their seasonal profit margins. The title transfer was aggressively fast-tracked through the county clerk office by their team of high-paid commercial lawyers. Exactly 5 days later, while Derek was busy posting photos of his expensive oceanfront dinners online, my private bank account registered a massive pending wire transfer. The sale officially closed. The deed was entirely transferred. This pristine $1.2 million suburban sanctuary no longer belonged to me, and it certainly did not belong to Derek. It was now the exclusive private property of a ruthless corporate development firm that specialized in aggressive residential demolition. I sat in my home office looking around at the expensive crown molding and the custom hardwood floors. I had spent many years making this place beautiful, but I felt zero sentimental attachment to it anymore. The walls were tainted by his lies, and the foundation was built on his arrogant deception. The house was successfully sold, but I still had a massive logistical nightmare to manage. I had exactly 48 hours left to completely empty the entire property of my belongings before the demolition crews arrived with their sledgehammers. I had exactly 48 hours left to completely empty the entire property of my belongings before the demolition crews arrived with their sledgehammers. Sleep was no longer an option. I hired a premium white glove packing service, instructing them to box up everything that legally belonged to me. They descended upon the house like a swarm of highly efficient worker bees, wrapping crystal glasses, rolling up expensive Persian rugs, and carefully dismantling Leo's wooden crib. I stood in the center of the living room with a clipboard directing traffic, with the same cold precision I used during a corporate financial audit. I did not shed a single tear as the beautiful nursery I had painstakingly designed over the past 9 months was rapidly reduced to a stack of brown cardboard boxes. Every piece of furniture, every piece of art, and every single baby item was packed away. But I gave the moving crew very specific instructions regarding Derek's personal belongings. I told them not to touch a single piece of his clothing, his cheap sports memorabilia, or the heavy mahogany desk sitting in the home office. His physical footprint in this house was incredibly small compared to the massive financial space he falsely believed he occupied. By the dawn of day 12, the massive moving trucks were idling in my driveway, loading the very last of my secure digital servers and encrypted hard drives. I walked through the empty, echoing hallways, holding Leo tightly against my chest. The house felt incredibly vast and entirely hollow. I stepped into the primary bedroom one last time. Derek's expensive designer suits were still hanging perfectly in his walk-in closet. His custom golf clubs were still resting in the corner. His expensive watches and cologne collection sat untouched on the bathroom vanity. He was going to return from his luxury vacation, expecting to find his submissive wife waiting to serve him dinner. Instead, he would find nothing but his own useless junk, abandoned in a literal war zone. The moving foreman handed me the final inventory manifest. I signed it with a steady hand and watched the large trucks pull away, heading directly toward the highly secure, luxury-gated community where my new life was waiting. I remained behind in the empty driveway, waiting for the new corporate owners to officially take possession of their newly acquired asset. I did not have to wait long. Less than 20 minutes after my movers departed, a fleet of heavy-duty commercial trucks and massive industrial dumpsters roared down the quiet suburban street. The corporate real estate flipping company did not waste a single second. They had aggressive seasonal profit margins to hit, and this property was their newest high-priority project. A rugged, heavily tattooed construction foreman stepped out of a mud-splattered pickup truck carrying a thick roll of architectural blueprints and a heavy steel crowbar. I walked over to him holding the master set of house keys. I handed them over without a single moment of hesitation. He tipped his hard hat, signaling to the dozen burly workers swarming behind him. The crew aggressively pushed past me, carrying sledgehammers, heavy electric saws, and massive industrial trash bins right through the front entryway. I stood on the manicured front lawn, bouncing Leo gently in my arms, and watched as the aggressive physical dismantling of Derek's absolute pride and joy officially commenced. The heavy rhythmic sound of raw destruction echoing throughout the once peaceful neighborhood was incredibly deafening and absolutely beautiful to witness after enduring so many years of suffocating deception. The violent crash of heavy steel shattering drywall echoed across the street. I watched through the large front windows as the foreman swung a massive sledgehammer directly into the pristine imported Italian marble island in the kitchen. The expensive stone cracked and completely shattered, raining down onto the custom hardwood floors. Another worker took a heavy crowbar to the expensive custom cabinetry, ripping the wooden doors right off their steel hinges. They were gutting the entire first floor down to the bare wooden studs. The massive antique chandelier Derek loved to brag about to his fraternity brothers was unceremoniously ripped from the ceiling and tossed into the metal dumpster sitting on the crushed grass of the front lawn. Thick clouds of white drywall dust billowed out of the open windows, completely coating Derek's abandoned golf clubs and expensive suits still trapped inside the master suite. The beautiful sanctuary was being rapidly transformed into a chaotic, hazardous construction site. His carefully constructed fake reality was physically crumbling into dust right in front of my eyes. I adjusted my sleeping baby securely into his luxury car seat, turned around, walked steadily to my SUV, and drove away to my secure new life without looking back. I drove 30 miles away from the affluent but entirely accessible suburban neighborhood I had just sold. My destination was a private, ultra-luxury gated community nestled deep within the heavily forested hills overlooking the city skyline. This place was not just an upscale neighborhood, it was a veritable fortress designed exclusively for high-net-worth individuals who valued absolute privacy and severe security above all else. I pulled my heavy SUV up to the massive wrought iron front gates. There were no simple keypads or friendly retired security guards waving cars through. A heavily armed tactical security officer stepped out of the bulletproof guardhouse. I rolled down my window, holding up my newly issued resident identification card. He scanned the barcode while a sophisticated biometric camera mounted on the stone pillar silently registered my precise facial features, instantly linking my identity to my newly leased luxury villa. The heavy iron gates slowly swung open, granting me access to my impenetrable new sanctuary. I drove down the pristine, winding private roads lined with mature oak trees and immaculate landscaping. I parked in the attached garage of my new residence. It was a stunning modern architectural masterpiece made of glass and steel, entirely hidden from the main access road. When I stepped inside carrying Leo in his car seat, the sheer contrast to the chaotic demolition site I had just left behind was incredibly jarring, yet deeply comforting. The white glove moving service had already unpacked every single box. My custom mahogany dining table was perfectly centered under a modern chandelier. My dual-monitor corporate workstation was flawlessly set up in the soundproof home office. Most importantly, Leo's beautiful wooden crib and soft rocking chair were arranged exactly as they had been in his old nursery. I gently lifted my sleeping son out of his carrier and laid him down in his familiar bed. For the first time in almost 2 weeks, the suffocating knot of anxiety in my chest completely unraveled. Derek and his toxic family could not simply use a spare key to invade this space. They could not even approach the front gates without triggering an immediate police response. We were physically untouchable, but physical security was only half of the equation. Derek was still sitting in Mexico, believing he could just call my cell phone and scream his manipulative threats whenever he pleased. I walked into my new home office, sat down at my desk, and pulled my personal cell phone out of my pocket. It was time to execute a complete digital erasure. I logged into my cellular provider portal and permanently disconnected the phone number I had used for the last 10 years. I ordered a brand new device on a highly secure encrypted corporate network plan under the name of my blind trust. I immediately took a pair of heavy steel scissors, shredded the old physical SIM card, and violently snapped the old cellular device completely in half before throwing it away. Next, I systematically dismantled my entire social media presence. I permanently deleted my Facebook account, my Instagram profile, and my professional LinkedIn page. I erased every single digital breadcrumb that Derek Brenda or his vicious sister Megan could potentially use to track my location or monitor my current emotional state. I effectively ceased to exist in the digital world they inhabited. I became a total ghost. I leaned back in my ergonomic office chair, staring at the blank digital wall calendar on my left monitor. It was currently Friday evening. Derek's flight from Cabo was scheduled to land at our local international airport early Sunday afternoon. In less than 48 hours, his Uber would pull up to the exact address he believed he still owned. He would expect to find his freshly painted front door, his perfectly manicured lawn, and his terrified wife waiting to blindly accept his ridiculous lies about crypto investments and corporate company cars. Instead, he was going to walk directly into an active commercial demolition zone. He would find his expensive designer suits covered in thick, toxic drywall dust and a crew of aggressive construction workers ready to physically throw him off their private property. I had spent the last 12 days methodically severing every single financial, legal, and physical tie binding me to his narcissistic abuse. I had successfully protected my son, secured my assets, and alerted the federal authorities to his severe corporate wire fraud. The trap was flawlessly set. The explosive charges were perfectly wired. All I had to do now was sit back in my heavily guarded luxury fortress, hold my precious baby boy, and wait patiently for Derek to finally press the detonator on his own spectacular destruction. My nightmare was officially over, and his worst nightmare was just about to begin. The afternoon sun beat down on the black luxury Uber SUV as it navigated the familiar tree-lined streets of my former neighborhood. In the back seat, Derek slouched against the leather upholstery, wearing designer sunglasses to shield his bloodshot eyes. He was sporting a deep, expensive Mexican tan, but his physical posture betrayed a massive, lingering hangover from consuming far too much premium tequila during his final night in Cabo San Lucas. He smelled heavily of stale alcohol masked by copious amounts of high-end cologne. He spent the entire 30-minute car ride from the international airport silently rehearsing the aggressive, manipulative speech he planned to deliver the moment he walked through the front door. He fully expected to find me sitting on the living room couch, exhausted, crying, and completely broken by the horrific legal threats he had hurled at me over the phone 2 weeks ago. Derek confidently believed his psychological warfare had worked flawlessly. I had not sent him a single text message or attempted to call him since our explosive conversation. In his arrogant, narcissistic mind, my absolute silence was the ultimate proof of my complete submission. He assumed I had backed down, deleted the digital screenshots of his bank transfers, and accepted my pathetic reality as his obedient wife. He smirked to himself, tapping his expensive shoes against the floorboard. He was already planning to complain about the temperature of the house and criticize whatever dinner I had supposedly prepared. He wanted to immediately establish absolute dominance the second he dropped his Rimowa suitcase onto the imported hardwood floors. The Uber driver tapped his GPS screen, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. The digital map indicated they had arrived at the correct destination, but the physical environment outside the windshield did not match the affluent residential profile of the street. "We are here, sir," the driver announced, hesitantly pulling the heavy vehicle over to the curb. "But it looks like there is some major construction going on." Derek scoffed loudly, annoyed by the driver interrupting his internal monologue. He assumed one of our wealthy neighbors was simply having their driveway repaved or installing a new luxury pool. He casually took off his designer sunglasses and looked out the tinted passenger window. The arrogant smirk on his face instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated confusion. He blinked hard, rubbing his hungover eyes, entirely convinced he was experiencing a vivid hallucination caused by severe dehydration and alcohol withdrawal. He was staring directly at the exact plot of land where our $1.2 million sanctuary was supposed to be. The address numbers painted on the stone mailbox perfectly matched his home, but the meticulously manicured green lawn he obsessed over was completely annihilated. The soft grass had been brutally torn apart by heavy machinery tires and deep mud tracks. Sitting directly in the center of his prized front yard were two massive rusted dumpsters overflowing with shattered drywall, splintered wood, and twisted metal pipes. Derek grabbed the door handle and practically fell out of the SUV, his expensive leather shoes sinking immediately into a thick puddle of gray construction sludge. He stumbled forward, his jaw dropping open as he took in the full catastrophic scale of the destruction. The beautiful custom-painted red oak front door was completely gone. In its place hung a thick, translucent sheet of industrial plastic tarp, flapping violently in the afternoon breeze. The pristine bay windows that used to look out into the neighborhood had been entirely ripped from their frames, leaving dark, gaping holes in the front facade of the property. The Uber driver quickly popped the trunk, placed Derek's silver suitcase on the curb, and sped away, clearly eager to escape the chaotic construction zone. Derek did not even notice the car leaving. He stood completely frozen on the ruined sidewalk, the loud rhythmic pounding of heavy sledgehammers and electric saws vibrating through the soles of his shoes. A thick cloud of white plaster dust drifted out of the empty window frames, coating his expensive black travel jacket in a fine, chalky powder. "This cannot be right," Derek muttered to himself, his voice trembling with a sudden surge of pure panic. He pulled his cell phone out of his pocket, frantically checking the GPS coordinates, praying that the driver had somehow dropped him off at the wrong address. But the digital blue dot blinked steadily right over his own property line. He looked back up at the ruined house. The custom Italian marble he loved bragging about was currently sitting in shattered pieces inside the metal dumpster right next to him. He slowly grabbed the heavy handle of his expensive suitcase and began walking mechanically up the destroyed concrete pathway toward the flapping plastic tarp. Derek dragged his heavy silver suitcase up the cracked concrete walkway, his expensive leather shoes sinking deep into the wet mud left behind by the massive commercial dumpsters. Every single step he took felt incredibly heavy, as if he were wading through a thick nightmare. The deafening screech of a circular saw echoed from the second floor, sending a fresh shower of white drywall dust drifting down from the open window frames. He reached the concrete steps of the front porch, abandoning his luggage in the dirt. His hands were shaking violently as he reached out and grabbed the edge of the thick plastic tarp, hanging where his custom red oak door used to be. He ripped the heavy plastic aside and stepped into the entryway. A massive cloud of suffocating dust hit him instantly, causing him to cough violently. When the air finally cleared enough for him to see, his blood ran completely cold. The beautiful, pristine living room he had left behind just 14 days ago was entirely gone. The imported Italian marble kitchen island was reduced to a pile of shattered rubble. The custom hardwood floors were ripped up, exposing the raw subflooring underneath. Thick electrical wires hung dangerously from the exposed ceiling joists. He stumbled backward, his hands flying up to his head in absolute disbelief. "No, no, this cannot be happening." The words tore out of his throat in a raw, desperate scream that was nearly drowned out by the heavy construction machinery. He spun around in circles, desperately searching for any sign of his wife, his infant son, or his expensive furniture. There was nothing but raw, violent destruction. "Hey!" A deep, aggressive voice barked from the hallway. "You cannot be in here, buddy. This is an active commercial demolition zone." Derek whipped his head around. Stepping out from the gutted remains of the formal dining room was a massive, heavily tattooed construction foreman. The man was easily 6.5 feet tall, covered in thick gray plaster dust, and casually holding a heavy steel crowbar in his right hand. He glared down at Derek with absolute contempt, clearly annoyed by the sudden intrusion. "You need to put on a hard hat or get off my property right now before I call the local police and have you arrested for criminal trespassing," the foreman warned, taking a heavy step forward. Derek straightened his posture desperately, trying to summon his usual arrogant corporate sales persona. He puffed out his chest and pointed a shaking finger directly at the massive worker. "You are not calling anyone," Derek screamed, his voice cracking with pure panic. "I am the one calling the police right now. This is my private property. I own this house. I live here with my wife. You are actively destroying my home. Stop whatever you are doing immediately and get your men out of my house before I press federal charges against your entire company." The heavy machinery on the first floor suddenly shut off. The sudden silence in the gutted room was deafening. The massive foreman stared at Derek for a few seconds before letting out a loud, mocking laugh. His deep chuckle echoed off the bare wooden studs. "Your house?" the foreman asked, wiping a thick layer of sweat and dust from his forehead. "Look around, pal. Nobody lives here anymore. The previous owner completely cleaned the place out and handed me the keys 4 days ago. Our corporate development firm bought this entire lot in pure cash. We closed on the property late last week. You are currently standing inside a commercial construction site owned by a real estate conglomerate." "That is a complete lie." Derek fired back, his face turning bright red with terrifying realization. "My name is on the mortgage. My wife cannot legally sell a marital asset without my explicit written signature. I will sue you for everything you have." The foreman casually hooked the heavy steel crowbar onto his thick leather tool belt. He reached into the back pocket of his denim jeans and pulled out a folded piece of thick legal paper. It was a standardized copy of the expedited commercial title transfer. He unfolded the document and shoved it aggressively toward Derek. "I do not care about your marital problems, buddy," the foreman said coldly. "I only care about the legal deed. We bought this property free and clear from a registered legal entity called Zenith Holdings. The female trustee signed the paperwork, took the massive wire transfer, and gave us absolute legal possession. Your name is absolutely nowhere on this document." Derek grabbed the paper with trembling hands. His bloodshot eyes scanned the heavy black text. Zenith Holdings. It was the exact name of the blind trust Sienna had casually mentioned setting up years ago. He had completely ignored it, assuming his name on the electricity bills granted him half the equity. The horrifying reality finally crashed down on him. She had legally sold the house right out from under him while he was drinking margaritas on the beach. He had never owned a single brick of this property. The foreman grabbed Derek by the shoulder of his expensive travel jacket. "Time is up, buddy," he growled, physically shoving Derek backward toward the plastic tarp. "You have exactly 10 seconds to grab your ridiculous silver suitcase and step off my curb before I have my crew throw you into that dumpster." Derek stumbled backward, bursting through the plastic tarp and falling hard onto his knees in the wet mud of his former front yard. Derek stumbled backward, bursting through the plastic tarp and falling hard onto his knees in the wet mud of his former front yard. The heavy silver suitcase tipped over beside him, splashing thick brown sludge onto his expensive designer travel jacket. He knelt there in the dirt, the rhythmic pounding of the demolition crew echoing behind him, completely unable to process the absolute collapse of his reality. He scrambled to his feet, his hands shaking so violently he could barely operate his cell phone. His first instinct was to call me to scream and threaten and demand answers for how I managed to orchestrate this massive real estate transaction without his knowledge. He quickly found my contact in his phone and pressed the green call button. He held the device to his ear, his heart hammering against his ribs in sheer panic. Instead of the standard ringing tone, he was met with a harsh, automated robotic voice. "We are sorry, but the number you have dialed has been disconnected or is no longer in service." He pulled the phone away from his face and stared at the screen in utter disbelief. He dialed the number again, pressing his thumb down hard on the glass. The exact same automated message played back to him. The terrifying truth finally began to sink into his arrogant mind. I had not just sold the house. I had completely erased myself from his life. I was a ghost, unreachable and entirely untouchable. He desperately needed to find me, but he had absolutely no idea where to even begin looking. The immediate realization hit him that he could not possibly return to his corporate office on Monday morning. He needed an emergency extension on his vacation time to hire a lawyer and track down his missing wife. He frantically scrolled through his corporate contact list and tapped the number for Richard, the Senior Vice President of Human Resources. He wiped a smear of wet mud from his forehead, clearing his throat to mask the absolute panic in his voice. He needed to sound professional, like a senior executive handling an unfortunate family crisis. The line rang twice before Richard picked up. Derek immediately launched into his prepared excuse. "Richard, it is Derek," he said quickly. "Listen, I know I am supposed to be back in the office on Monday, but I have a massive family emergency. My wife is having a severe mental health crisis and has done something completely crazy with our property. I need you to extend my personal leave for another week while I sort out this massive legal headache." There was a long, chilling silence on the other end of the line. When Richard finally spoke, his voice did not hold a single ounce of professional courtesy. It was entirely cold, calculated, and strictly legal. "Derek, you do not have any personal leave to extend," Richard stated flatly. "Your employment with this corporation was officially terminated with cause 48 hours ago. Your corporate email has been deactivated. Your security badges have been permanently revoked, and your company-issued laptop was remotely wiped and seized by our internal security team." Derek stood frozen on the sidewalk, the color completely draining from his face. "Terminated," he choked out, his voice cracking. "What are you talking about, Richard? I am the top regional sales director in the entire company. You cannot fire me over the phone while I am on an approved vacation. I will sue the company for wrongful termination." "You will not be suing anyone," Derek. Richard fired back, his tone turning instantly hostile. On Friday morning, the executive board received a highly detailed encrypted whistleblower dossier. It contained undeniable documented proof that you utilized our secure corporate vendor accounts to temporarily park and launder $80,000 in stolen funds. It also provided digital network logs, proving you used our corporate virtual private network to commit felony wire fraud across state lines. You implicated this entire corporation in a federal financial crime. We had an emergency board meeting and unanimously voted for your immediate termination to protect the company from legal liability. Derek felt the ground physically swaying beneath his feet. The air was sucked out of his lungs. The crypto investment lie he had confidently sold to me on the phone had completely backfired. Whoever sent that dossier knew exactly what he did. But Richard was not finished delivering the devastating news. "We have officially handed the entire encrypted dossier over to our corporate legal team," Richard continued ruthlessly. "Per our strict compliance regulations, we forwarded the evidence of your network abuse to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They are reviewing it right now. If you step foot on our property, you will be arrested. Do not ever call again." The line went dead. Derek stood on the cracked sidewalk, staring blankly at his cell phone screen. A cold, nauseating sweat broke out across his forehead, mixing with the thick layer of white drywall dust clinging to his skin. The FBI was reviewing his digital network logs. His prestigious, high-paying career was completely incinerated in a matter of seconds. He was no longer a regional sales director. He was a prime suspect in a federal wire fraud investigation. He looked back at the commercial demolition site one last time. The massive tattooed foreman was glaring at him from the ruined entryway, tapping the heavy steel crowbar against his palm with a menacing smile. Derek grabbed the handle of his silver suitcase and practically ran down the street, desperately putting as much distance as possible between himself and the destroyed property. He walked for 3 long blocks until his lungs burned and his legs felt entirely numb. He collapsed onto a wooden city bus bench, his chest heaving violently. He needed a safe place to sit down, process the absolute nightmare unfolding around him, and formulate a new strategy. He opened the web browser on his cell phone and navigated to the booking site of a 5-star luxury hotel located in the downtown financial district. He selected their premium penthouse suite, arrogantly believing he could simply hide from his catastrophic reality by wrapping himself in expensive room service and high-thread count sheets. He rapidly typed in the 16-digit number of his premium platinum rewards credit card and clicked the confirmation button. A bright red error message instantly flashed across the screen. Transaction declined. Please contact your financial institution. Derek scowled aggressively, rubbing his bloodshot eyes. He assumed the bank had flagged the sudden domestic charge because he had just returned from an international trip. He opened his leather wallet, pulled out his secondary gold corporate credit card, and typed in the new numbers. The exact same red error message appeared. Transaction declined. Panic began to claw its way up his throat. He quickly closed the web browser and opened his primary mobile banking application. The biometric facial recognition scanner unlocked his secure dashboard. Instead of seeing his usual high 6-figure balances, the entire screen was locked behind a severe warning banner. Every single joint checking and savings account was grayed out. Next to his available balances, a bold text notification stated the accounts were currently under a strict judicial freeze. A separate digital message in his banking inbox informed him that the freeze was mandated by a federal court order due to an active, ongoing investigation involving suspected wire fraud, stolen custodial funds, and forged digital mortgage signatures. I had not just taken my legal half of the money. I had weaponized the justice system to completely paralyze his access to the remaining funds. He was staring at absolute financial ground zero. He had no house, no job, and absolutely zero access to a single dollar. Desperation completely overtook his arrogant pride. He needed cash, and he needed a place to sleep tonight. He frantically scrolled through his contacts and clicked on Madison's name at the very top of his screen. He immediately began typing a frantic text message. Madison, it is Derek. My crazy wife just locked me out of my bank accounts and did something insane to my house. I am stuck on the street. I need to come over to your apartment right now. Can you wire me a few $1,000s so I can hire a good lawyer to fix this huge mess? I will pay you back double by next week. He stared at the screen, watching the small delivery notification appear beneath his message. A few agonizing seconds passed before his phone chimed loudly in his sweaty hand. Madison had not sent a comforting reply offering him shelter. She had sent a high-resolution photograph. Derek opened the image, his stomach dropping into his shoes. It was a picture of the brand-new luxury Porsche Macan he had just purchased for her. The expensive vehicle was currently hoisted high in the air, securely attached to the back of a heavy-duty commercial tow truck. 2 aggressive-looking repossession agents were standing in her driveway holding clipboards. A second message popped up immediately below the photograph. You absolute broke, pathetic liar. The bank just repossessed the car because the down payment was flagged as fraudulent stolen funds. My credit score is completely ruined because you put my name on the fraudulent registration. You are a disgusting criminal. Do not ever contact me again, or I will file a police report for harassment. The text bubble instantly turned green. She had completely blocked his number. He was now entirely and utterly alone. With his credit cards declined, all of his bank accounts frozen by a federal judge, and his mistress blocking his number, Derek had absolutely no other options left. He could not even afford a $2 city bus fare. He was forced to walk the entire 5 miles to his mother's house. The blistering afternoon sun beat down relentlessly on his shoulders as he dragged his heavy silver suitcase across the long, cracked city sidewalks. The expensive plastic wheels of the luggage scraped loudly against the concrete, grinding through the thick mud and drywall dust, still clinging to his designer travel jacket. Every muscle in his body ached from the severe hangover and the sheer terror of his collapsing reality. He felt the judgmental stares of passing drivers completely stripping away whatever tiny shred of corporate pride he had left. By the time he finally reached the upscale suburban neighborhood where Brenda lived, the sun was beginning to set, casting long, dark shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns. He practically collapsed against her massive mahogany front door, slamming his fist against the wood in a desperate, breathless panic. The heavy door swung open instantly, as if they had been waiting right behind it. Brenda and Megan stood in the foyer, but they did not offer him a warm, comforting embrace. The interior of the house was in a state of absolute chaos. Megan was pacing back and forth across the expensive Persian rug, aggressively biting her fingernails, while Brenda looked like she had aged 10 years in a single week. Her eyes were heavily bloodshot, and her expensive designer makeup was smeared across her cheeks. "Get inside right now and close the door before the neighbors see you looking like a homeless vagrant," Brenda hissed, grabbing him by the collar of his ruined jacket and physically yanking him into the brightly lit hallway. Derek stumbled inside, dropping the handle of his suitcase onto the floor. "Mom, you have to help me," Derek pleaded, his voice cracking with pure desperation. "Sienna completely destroyed my life. She sold our luxury house, she emptied our joint bank accounts, and she got me fired from my job. The federal authorities are officially looking into my corporate network files. I already know she sold the house." "You absolute idiot!" Brenda screamed, completely dropping her fake facade of the loving, supportive mother. "I went over there last week to get the dining table and she called the police on me. She slapped me with an emergency restraining order in front of the entire neighborhood. I have not been able to show my face at the country club for days." Megan stopped pacing and turned her anger toward her brother. "And Jamal has been acting incredibly strange," Megan yelled, pointing a manicured finger directly at Derek. "He keeps asking me suspicious questions about our home network security and making dark comments about your corporate finances. Sienna completely outsmarted all of us. You constantly told us you had this brilliant master plan to take her money and secure the property. Instead, you left a massive paper trail of federal crimes and let a glorified accountant completely dismantle our entire family. You were supposed to be the smart one, Derek." Derek wiped a layer of dried sweat and construction dust from his forehead, completely stunned by their absolute lack of sympathy. They were not concerned about his potential prison sentence or his destroyed career. They were only terrified of losing their own elite social status and their unlimited access to my financial resources. "Stop yelling at me and help me fix this," Derek demanded, his panic rapidly turning into vicious anger. "We need to find her right now. If I can just get her in a room, I know I can manipulate her into dropping the criminal charges. She is still my wife and she still loves me. I know exactly how to control her emotional weaknesses." Brenda let out a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed off the high ceiling. "You clearly do not know how to control anything, Derek," she snapped bitterly. "But you are right about one thing. We have to find exactly where that psychotic woman is hiding before she completely ruins us." Brenda aggressively marched over to her antique writing desk and snatched her premium leather wallet. She quickly pulled out her high-limit corporate platinum credit card and grabbed her cell phone. "I am calling an extremely elite private investigator right now," Brenda announced coldly. "I do not care how much it costs or what illegal digital methods he has to use to bypass her security. We are going to track down her new address tonight, and we are going to drive over there and force her to undo this absolute nightmare tomorrow morning." Brenda's premium credit card worked miracles. By 9 o'clock the next morning, the elite private investigator handed them a sealed manila envelope containing my exact new address. He traced the massive corporate wire transfer from the real estate flipping company directly to my luxury lease. Brenda shoved Derek into the passenger seat of her silver Lexus, with Megan aggressively buckling herself into the back. They sped out of their suburban enclave toward the forested hills. Derek spent the entire drive rehearsing his manipulation tactics. He was going to use our infant son as a psychological weapon, claiming my postpartum hormones permanently damaged my sanity. He planned to demand I instantly withdraw the corporate whistleblower complaint and unblock his frozen bank accounts. He genuinely believed his physical presence and his mother's screaming would shatter my confidence. They expected to find another standard suburban subdivision they could easily manipulate. Instead, Brenda was forced to slam hard on her expensive ceramic brakes. Her Lexus skidded to a sudden halt directly in front of the massive 12-foot-high wrought iron security gates of my new residential fortress. This was a heavily fortified enclave designed exclusively for individuals requiring absolute privacy. Two heavily armed tactical security officers wearing dark vests stepped out of the bulletproof stone guardhouse. Derek rolled down his window, attempting to project his usual arrogant authority. "Open the gate right now," Derek ordered, waving his hand dismissively. "We are here to see my wife. I demand immediate access to her private property." The primary security officer did not even blink. He calmly rested his hand on his tactical utility belt and looked down at Derek with absolutely zero expression. "Sir, this is private, highly secure property," the officer stated in a deep, unwavering voice. "You are not on the pre-approved digital visitor registry. Turn your vehicle around immediately and vacate the entrance." Derek's face flushed dark red. His fragile ego completely shattered by his job loss and sudden homelessness completely snapped. He pushed open the passenger door, aggressively stepping toward the armed officer. "Do you have absolutely any idea who I am?" Derek screamed, pointing his finger at the guard's chest. "I am a senior regional director, and that is my legal wife hiding in there." Brenda quickly unbuckled her seatbelt and stormed out of the driver's side, losing whatever country club dignity she had left. She marched right up to the heavy iron gates, wrapping her manicured hands around the thick metal bars and violently shaking them. "You let us in right now," Brenda shrieked. "She is holding my grandson hostage. I will have your security company shut down today." Megan jumped out of the back seat, holding her cell phone high in the air with the camera recording. "I am filming you restricting our constitutional rights," Megan yelled hysterically, clearly forgetting she was standing on private corporate property. "I am going to post this all over the internet and expose this corrupt community." The tactical guards remained unbothered by the dramatic spectacle unfolding in front of them. A screaming family of disgraced suburbanites was absolutely nothing to them. The primary officer took a slow step backward, creating a safe physical distance from Derek's aggressive posturing. "Ma'am, if you do not release the gate and return to your vehicle in exactly 15 seconds, I will deploy chemical pepper spray and detain all three of you for criminal trespassing," the officer warned coldly. He then stepped back inside the bulletproof guardhouse and picked up the secure landline connected straight to my private villa. I was sitting peacefully in my sun-drenched living room, holding Leo against my chest and enjoying a warm cup of herbal tea. The sudden sharp ringing of the dedicated security phone on my kitchen island broke the silence. I placed my teacup down, walked over, and answered the call. "Miss Sienna." The deep voice of the head guard echoed through the speaker. "We currently have 3 hostile, uninvited individuals causing a severe disturbance at the main security perimeter. They are aggressively demanding entry and threatening my staff. I have already dispatched our secondary response unit to the gate. Do you want me to contact the local police department and have them officially arrested and removed in handcuffs?" I looked down at my sleeping son, feeling a profound wave of absolute power wash over me. The trap had worked flawlessly. They were exactly where I wanted them. "No, officer," I replied softly, a cold smile crossing my face. "Please do not arrest them just yet. I ask that you hold them exactly where they are. I am coming down to the gate to handle this situation personally." I ended the call with the security desk and gently placed my sleeping son back into his crib. The private nurse I hired for the week was already sitting quietly in the nursery reading a hardcover book. I told her I would be back in exactly 10 minutes. I walked into my expansive walk-in closet and quickly changed out of my comfortable postpartum loungewear. I put on a perfectly tailored navy blue blazer, crisp white trousers, and a pair of elegant designer heels. I brushed my hair, applied a touch of light lipstick, and looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. I did not look like the exhausted, bleeding, terrified woman Derek had abandoned exactly 2 weeks ago. I looked like a senior corporate executive completely in control of her financial empire and her emotional state. I grabbed a thick legal folder from my mahogany desk and walked out the heavy front door. The morning air was crisp and refreshing as I walked down the paved pathway toward the main security perimeter. As I approached the towering wrought iron gates, the chaotic screaming of my toxic in-laws grew significantly louder. Megan was still holding her cell phone high in the air, like a weapon, while Brenda was violently shaking the thick metal bars. Derek stood slightly behind them, looking absolutely pathetic. His expensive travel jacket was permanently ruined, covered in thick gray drywall dust and hardened brown construction mud. His face was pale, heavily sweating, and etched with severe, undeniable panic. When Brenda finally saw me approaching, her eyes widened with malicious, unhinged fury. "There she is," Brenda shrieked, pointing her manicured finger aggressively through the heavy iron bars. "You ungrateful, psychotic woman! Open this gate right now and explain exactly why you stole my son's house and froze his joint bank accounts." I did not speed up my pace. I walked with deliberate, intimidating slowness, letting my expensive heels click sharply against the smooth concrete pavement. I stopped a few feet away from the gate, safely out of their physical reach. The two tactical security officers immediately stepped to my side, standing like heavily armed professional bodyguards. I did not yell back at Brenda. I did not even look at her. I kept my eyes entirely locked on Derek, watching the sheer terror radiate from his violently trembling body. I handed the thick legal folder directly to the primary security officer. "Please pass this to my ex-husband," I said calmly. The officer took the heavy envelope, stepped forward, and slid it through the narrow gap in the iron bars. Derek hesitated, his hands shaking so violently he could barely grasp the thick yellow paper. "Open it, Derek," I commanded, my voice projecting clearly and powerfully over the morning breeze. He fumbled with the metal clasp and pulled out the thick stack of official legal documents. Brenda and Megan immediately crowded around his shoulders, eagerly trying to read the printed text. The very first document was a formal legal petition for absolute divorce. Right beneath it was an emergency family court order granting me full legal and physical custody of Leo, specifically citing severe financial abuse and pending federal criminal charges. Derek immediately tried to execute his classic manipulation tactics. "Mom, do not look at this." Derek stammered frantically, trying to shove the thick papers back into the envelope. "She is completely faking these legal documents. She completely lost her mind after the surgery. She is trying to steal my money and frame me for corporate fraud because she is insanely jealous of my career success." I smiled coldly, stepping right up to the imposing iron bars. "You do not have any money, Derek," I stated clearly, ensuring Brenda and Megan heard every single word I spoke. "The house belonged to my private blind trust. You never owned a single brick of it, and you are not being framed for corporate fraud. You are being actively investigated by the FBI because you committed felony wire fraud." Brenda gasped loudly, grabbing Derek tightly by the arm. "What on earth is she talking about?" Brenda demanded, her voice suddenly trembling with genuine fear. "I will tell you exactly what she is talking about," I continued smoothly, systematically dismantling his entire false narrative. "While I was bleeding on a hospital operating table, your precious golden boy forged my legal signature to illegally apply for a $150,000 home equity loan using his secure corporate network. That is exactly why his company fired him 48 hours ago. But that is not even the worst part of his betrayal. He also deliberately drained $80,000 from his own newborn son's college savings account to buy a brand new luxury Porsche for his 22-year-old junior assistant. That is a massive lie," Derek screamed, his face turning a dark shade of purple. "She is lying to you, Mom." Turn directly to the third page of the folder, I instructed calmly. Brenda violently snatched the heavy folder right out of Derek's shaking hands. She flipped to the third page, her eyes scanning the high-resolution photograph of the luxury car registration bearing the mistress's exact name, followed immediately by the bank routing numbers proving the money was stolen directly from Leo's custodial fund. Megan lowered her cell phone completely, forgetting to record the confrontation. Her jaw dropped open in absolute shock as she stared blankly at the undeniable physical evidence. Derek tried to reach for the folder, but Brenda aggressively slapped his hand away. The pristine, highly successful image of her perfect golden son completely shattered right before her very eyes. He was not a victim of a crazy hormonal wife. He was a broke, unemployed, federally investigated criminal who actively stole from his own helpless baby. "You explicitly promised me you had this entire situation handled," Brenda whispered, staring at Derek with a look of absolute horrifying disgust. "You told me you were making brilliant financial investments for the family." "He is a pathological liar, Brenda," I said softly. "He has always been a liar. And now he is entirely your problem." I took a step back from the gate, preparing to walk away and leave them to their chaotic realization. But before I could turn around, a sleek black SUV pulled up sharply behind Brenda's parked Lexus, completely blocking them in. The final devastating piece of my retaliation had just arrived. Megan did not even turn around to look at the newly arrived vehicle. Her brain simply could not process the overwhelming physical evidence of her brother's horrific crimes. Instead of accepting the terrifying reality staring her right in the face, her deeply ingrained family toxicity violently kicked in. She dropped her cell phone into her designer purse and lunged toward the iron gates, her face contorting with irrational, unhinged rage. "You are an absolute monster, Sienna!" Megan screamed, her voice cracking hysterically. "He is your husband. You are supposed to stand by him and support him when he makes a simple mistake. You completely ruined his entire life over a stupid car and a temporary loan. You are a vindictive, evil woman for tearing this family apart." I stared at her, completely unfazed by her pathetic attempt to shift the blame. It was genuinely fascinating to watch the intense psychological gymnastics she was performing to protect a man who stole from an infant. But before I could offer a cold reply, the heavy driver's side door of the black SUV opened with a solid thud. Jamal stepped out onto the pristine pavement. He was wearing a sharp charcoal business suit, holding a sleek leather briefcase in his right hand. His expression was incredibly calm, yet etched with a profound, undeniable exhaustion. Megan instantly spun around, her face lighting up with desperate relief. "Jamal, thank God you followed us here," Megan yelled frantically, pointing an accusing finger at me through the bars. "You have to help us. Sienna has completely lost her mind. She is making up insane lies about Derek committing federal crimes, and she has these armed thugs refusing to let us inside. Tell them to open this gate right now so we can handle this like a family." Jamal did not say a single word to his hysterical wife. He did not even look in her direction. He walked with heavy, purposeful steps, directly toward the massive iron gates, keeping his eyes locked entirely on me. I gave a subtle nod to the primary tactical officer. The guard immediately reached down to his control belt and pressed a small red button. A heavy electronic click echoed through the air as the reinforced pedestrian door adjacent to the main vehicle gates suddenly unlocked and swung open. Jamal stepped through the threshold, entering the highly secure perimeter. The heavy steel door instantly slammed shut and locked firmly behind him. He walked over and stood directly shoulder to shoulder with me, presenting an impenetrable unified front against the sheer madness standing on the street. Megan blinked rapidly, stepping back in absolute confusion. "Jamal, what are you doing?" she stammered, her voice suddenly dropping into a nervous whisper. "Why are you standing on her side?" Jamal slowly set his leather briefcase down on the concrete pavement. He popped the brass latches, reached inside, and pulled out a thick manila folder of his own. He walked right up to the heavy iron bars, looking down at the woman he had been married to for 6 years. The look of absolute disgust in his eyes made Megan physically flinch. "I am standing on the side of the truth," Jamal said, his deep voice radiating an icy, uncompromising authority. I am standing with the woman who was brutally betrayed while recovering from major surgery. And I am standing against a family of narcissistic enablers. He pushed his folder through the narrow gap in the iron bars directly into Megan's trembling hands. Yesterday afternoon, I finished a complete forensic diagnostic sweep of our entire home network, Jamal explained coldly. I did not just find the forged mortgage documents Derek sent you to hide. I found months of your deleted text messages. You knew exactly about the 22-year-old assistant. You knew he was planning to drain his son's college fund. You actively encouraged him to do it, and you deliberately helped him hide the digital evidence on my secure servers. You brought federal wire fraud directly into my home, Megan. Megan's face turned completely ashen. She looked down at the folder in her hands, her lower lip quivering uncontrollably as she opened the cover. I refuse to raise my children in a family that actively covers up fraud and horrific emotional abuse, Jamal stated, delivering the final fatal blow to their toxic dynamic. I am officially filing for divorce. The papers you are holding contain my petition for full primary custody based on your active complicity in a federal criminal investigation. I have already locked you out of our joint accounts and changed the locks on the house. The silence that fell over the street was absolute. The arrogant, entitled family had been completely and utterly dismantled. Brenda was hyperventilating against the side of her Lexus, clutching the undeniable proof of her golden boy's felony crimes. Derek was kneeling in the dirt near the curb, physically broken, homeless, and terrified of his impending federal indictment. And Megan was standing frozen at the gates, loudly sobbing, as she realized her blind loyalty to her criminal brother had just cost her a loving husband, her beautiful home, and her children. The enablers were left completely broken, trapped in the precise hell they had helped create. I looked at Jamal, offering him a silent, respectful nod of solidarity. We turned our backs on the screaming, shattered family, walking peacefully up the manicured path toward my secure villa, leaving them locked outside forever. Exactly 8 months have passed since that morning at the security gates. The chaotic, desperate screams of a shattered narcissistic family, fading into the distance, was the absolute last time I ever had to hear their voices. The federal justice system moves incredibly fast when you hand them a perfectly organized, encrypted digital dossier containing irrefutable proof of corporate wire fraud and forged signatures. Derek did not even have the opportunity to drag me into a messy, prolonged divorce trial. The Federal Bureau of Investigation formally indicted him less than 3 weeks after his catastrophic return from Mexico. Faced with overwhelming digital network logs and the forged mortgage application, his expensive defense attorney advised him to take a blind plea deal. The judge did not show an ounce of leniency to a man who stole from his newborn son to fund a luxury affair. Derek is currently serving a mandatory 3-year sentence in a federal correctional facility. He traded his custom-tailored suits and oceanfront cabanas for a standard-issue canvas jumpsuit and a concrete cell. His 22-year-old assistant never visited him a single time. Brenda completely destroyed her own life trying to save her golden boy. She liquidated her entire retirement portfolio, sold her luxury sedan, and maxed out multiple credit cards to pay for Derek's astronomical federal defense fees. When the money ran out, the country club socialites she spent decades trying to impress completely turned their backs on her. She is currently drowning in insurmountable debt, living in a tiny rented apartment on the outskirts of the city, utterly isolated by her own toxic pride. Megan suffered a similar, entirely self-inflicted fate. Jamal made good on his promise. He finalized his divorce, secured primary physical custody of their children, and legally removed her from the beautiful home they shared. Without Jamal's massive cybersecurity salary to fund her shallow lifestyle, she was forced to take a minimum wage retail job just to survive. The entire family of enablers collapsed like a fragile house of cards the moment they were held accountable for their actions. As for me, I am sitting in the warm afternoon sun of my expansive private backyard. The gentle breeze rustles through the mature oak trees surrounding my secure luxury villa, I take a sip of freshly brewed espresso, relishing the absolute uninterrupted peace of my new reality. A few feet away on the manicured green lawn, my son Leo is happily crawling toward a pile of brightly colored blocks. He is almost a year old now, healthy, thriving, and completely shielded from the toxic manipulation that plagued my own childhood. Sitting in the lounge chair right next to me is Jamal. We share a quiet, knowing smile as Leo knocks over a tall tower of blocks and giggles loudly. Jamal is no longer just my former brother-in-law, he is my chosen family. We survived the exact same nightmare and we walked out of the fire together. He brings his kids over every single weekend, ensuring our children grow up surrounded by genuine love, absolute respect, and unbreakable moral boundaries. The financial empire I built is stronger than ever, and my blind trust remains impenetrable. Looking back at the bleeding, terrified woman sitting in that hospital bed, I barely recognize her. It is incredibly easy to let toxic partners and manipulative families convince you that you are weak, especially when you are at your most physically and emotionally vulnerable. They weaponize your exhaustion. They use your love against you. They rely entirely on your silence to maintain their comfortable, abusive illusions. But the moment you finally realize your own inherent worth, their absolute power completely evaporates. You do not have to tolerate disrespect just because you share a history, a marriage certificate, or a bloodline. You have the absolute right to stand up quietly, gather your evidence, protect your assets, and utterly dismantle the fake reality they built on top of your sacrifices. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to scream back. Sometimes true justice is simply walking away and letting them drown in the consequences of their own horrific actions. If you are currently sitting in the dark wondering if you have the strength to leave a toxic relationship or sever ties with a manipulative family, I am here to tell you that you absolutely do. You are far more capable and intelligent than they want you to believe. I want to hear from you. Scroll down to the comment section right now and share your own stories of survival. Tell me about the exact moment you recognized your worth, set an unbreakable boundary, and finally walked away from a toxic dynamic. Hit that like button if you believe in protecting your peace at all costs, and make sure you subscribe to the channel so we can continue building a community of strong, fiercely independent people who refuse to be victims. Your new life is waiting for you on the other side of your fear. Go out there and claim it.